Hello there, and welcome to our library. In all of my favorite stories, there's usually a hero tasked with a very difficult thing. That's all stories, I suppose. But the really good authors are very smart about it, because they know that performing a difficult task is rarely so much about the task itself, but more the journey to get there. And in many of those stories, one who has gone before usually shows up to speak encouragement or wisdom into the hero's adventure. Like Luke Skywalker. He had Ben Kenobi reminding him to use the Force, Luke, or something like that. Frodo Baggins. Well, he of course had Gandalf saying all that we can do is to decide what to do with the time that is given us. Harry Potter. Of course, he had the promise of his parents to stay with him to the very end. Or here, my boy Ender Wiggin. He had his sister Valentine who said, "I will love you no matter what." Or this old classic. The traveler Christian has the wise counsel of evangelist. Be not faithless, but believing. Blah, blah, blah. And just like the very first time that I ever read or saw these stories, every single time I read them or see them again, I'm instantly there with them again. That's a good author. I'm with them. I'm experiencing the adventure. I'm seeing what they see. I'm feeling what they feel. And oh, how I have longed in my life for that wise sage wisdom to come up from behind and to lend me courage for my own adventure. Because, as we said last week, I am so often afraid. I'm so often anxious in this life. And because the commands of God, they can seem hard, insensitive, or nonsensical even in areas of our life that we've created rules and systems that feel right to us. And on top of that, there's this pressure from the church and Christian community to comply with commands that we don't even understand sometimes, or risk losing the acceptance of God or Christians. And that pressure has caused so many to reject Jesus without a second thought. And yet, if we really look at the commands of God, we find that they're intrinsically connected to our pleasure and His glory. So we begin to learn slowly this truth, that the commands of God are actually intended for our joy. Now, if that's true, if it's true that the commands of God are intended for our joy, I have a question then. Why does it feel like so often He's left us just out there on our own? Heroes tasked with a very difficult thing, but without support, without advice, without Gandalf. It's no wonder that so many of us struggle with a deep, overwhelming fear and anxiety and depression, because if He's not there, what else is there but anxiety and fear and depression? Last week, when we talked about anxiety and fear, we said that there is an alternative to anxiety right here in the verses. And that's what we're going to talk about this week. So let's read it again. Philippians 4, 4-7. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again I say, rejoice. Let your reasonableness be known to everyone. The Lord is at hand. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Our command from Philippians 4 today is, in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your request be made known to God. Or to simplify, talk to God. Living anxiety-free, that's an utter mystery to most of us. How do we stop a feeling that's constantly bearing down on us? 1 out of 13 of every person on the globe deals with anxiety. And that's just the people that talk about it. That doesn't say anything about the people who just keep their mouths shut, who suffer silently, as it were. But that's a lot of people, regardless. I was even finding this week apps that have been created to simulate conversation if you're dealing with anxiety. It's people that can't deal with the anxiety of life, so they go to an app that uses a computer algorithm to understand their words and then speak encouragement that they desperately need from real people. It sounds really sad, but it's working to an extent. It just shows that as humans, we desperately need that connection, even if it's not real. And before we go any further, let me try to paraphrase our verses to speak them in a common tongue. Maybe hearing them from a different perspective will give you a different insight into those verses. It does for me. So here, Philippians 4, 4-7. And maybe this is the encouragement that you need this week. No matter where you are, and no matter what's going on, you can have absolute joy. Joy to the fullest, actually, with Jesus as your Lord. Knowing Him should change your life in such a way that it's evident to every single person around you. Did you know that He's near you? Did you know that He's bigger than the boogeyman or anything else that scares you? You don't need to be anxious about anything in your life. Nothing at all. Because and only because He's near you. You can trust Him completely. In fact, anytime you feel anxiety's icy fingers creeping in on you, run to Him. Start praying. Beg Him to never leave you, and then thank Him that He's promised to never leave you nor forsake you. He will give you peace right there in the middle of the storm. Peace that will blow your mind and leave you feeling safe, totally and utterly safe on the inside and the outside. He's promised to respond to you in this way, and He never breaks His promise. I need that encouragement. Do you understand that that's what the passage is telling you? That's what it means. Do you realize that Luke Skywalker and Frodo Baggins had nothing on the promises that God has made on your behalf? But that protective and permeating peace doesn't come to you just because you feel anxiety swelling up inside you. No, you have to go to Him. You have to ask Him for it. Or in short, You have to talk to God. Listen, He is not a Brinks home security system that you just plug in and it performs the menial task of watching your doors and your windows. No, this is a deep relationship, a relationship that goes with you into every battle and fray. This is not your local psychiatrist who takes your appointment and listens to you for an hour. This is the God who understands you completely before you slip onto that couch. And His desire is to flood you with His everlasting love. And this is definitely not an app on your phone that picks up on your behavioral tendencies and then speaks encouragement to you that you were really needing from actual people. No, this is Jesus Christ, the Savior of the world, the one who formed you in the womb and calls you by your real name. Talk to Him. Talk to Him. Ask Him for that peace. You'll never regret truly pursuing Jesus. What you will regret is trying to make Him one of those other false things. If you try to make Him something that He's not, He will always disappoint you by being much larger than you can understand. He'll always let you down because He's bigger than any small label you want to stick on Him, any tiny box you want to put Him in. Just like it says in Isaiah 55. Listen to this. Seek the Lord while He may be found. Call on Him while He is near. Let the wicked forsake his way, and the unrighteous man his thoughts. Let him return to the Lord, that He may have compassion on him, and to our God, for He will abundantly pardon. And check this. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. Man, I'm glad for that. Because I would give up faster. I would choose the people to love and the people not to love. Those are my ways. Those are my thoughts. And His ways are better. So I know He pursues me. And I will never regret pursuing Him. Can I read you a story that I wrote a few years back? It was essentially that idea in mind. I even illustrated it for us, so you can see kind of what I'm seeing. It's called The Story of Ashen Root and Jim. Once there were two young trees named Ashen Root and Jim. They were part of a new growth community that would someday be a mighty forest. Ashen Root and Jim were very excited to be a part of this new community. They could feel new life shooting through their limbs every day from the sun and the rain and the soil. One day, after a new crop of buds had sprouted from one of his small branches, Jim made a proclamation. Ashen Root, my friend, we've made it. What do you mean, Jim? Ashen Root wondered. What I mean is, we're trees. And furthermore, when we were first planted, we knew we would someday be a great forest, and we've arrived at that day. Oh, are you sure? Ashen Root asked. Well, we've heard stories of trees so great that their branches reach to the heavens. Trees so thick that cars could tunnel through them. And trees so strong that they could grow right out of the side of mountains. But we're still pretty small. I don't think we've made it. Listen, Ashen Root. Right now, we're trees. We have the sunlight, the rain, and the soil. We have all our friends around us. We could stop growing right now and never have to experience the trials of the older trees. The bird's nest, the squirrel droppings, the lightning strikes, and, here he shuddered, The lumberjacks. Oh, you're right, Jim. Those things don't sound very pleasant. But I don't think being afraid should keep us from becoming the mighty trees we are meant to be. If it's all the same to you, Jim, I'm going to keep growing to be the biggest tree in the forest. Jim shook his tiny leaves and said, Well, it's your felling, Ashen Root. But remember what I said. When you go through all the trouble to get up there and find out it's just the same as down here. Many years went by, decades in fact, and the trees around Jim grew up and up. Life was not as fun as Jim thought it would be. Sure, he was still a tree. He would still bud in the spring. He could still feel life in his branches, but in truth, his connection to the sun and the rain was being hindered by his small size. And nutrition from the soil was often taken by the larger roots of his companions. And when he tried to complain to them for stealing his food, their replies were so high and far off he could barely understand them. And many times, the only things that came back down from his friends were the droppings of the animals who nested in their branches. Jim became bitter. Those other trees are cruel. I can't believe I ever called them friends. Well, I'm not even sure if the sun and rain were ever as good as I thought they were. Now I just find them boring. In fact, if this is what it means to be a tree, I'm not even sure I want to continue with this crowd. On that day, the first of Jim's little leaves turned unseasonably brown and fell to the ground. Ashen Root, on the other hand, he turned his branches to the sun and never looked back. He had decided early on that with his roots in the rich soil, the sun would be his goal. And the taller he grew, the sun seemed to him bigger and bigger. The wider his branches and more plentiful his leaves, the more of the sun's light he soaked in and the more rain he gathered. Animals did nest in his branches. Children would climb his heights, and though it would cause him discomfort at times, it actually became a source of joy for him to share what he had received from the sun and the rain. When he had reached the ripe old age of 130 years old, a man wearing red and black flannel came with a loud machine that cut into his trunk and fell him to the ground. It hurt Ashen Root to fall, but never once did he regret having pursued the sun. And as he laid on the ground, being made ready for future use, he wondered about his old friend Jim, who was nowhere to be found. No stump marked his passing. Ashen Root was lifted by a giant claw and set on a pile of his friends. He lifted his eyes one more time to the sun above him and smiled. You were the greatest pursuit of my life. Thank you for your light and rain, for making my branches many and long and full of leaves. And at that, with a smile on his face, he was driven away and became in time part of many incredible things. Beds and tables, bookshelves and cabinets, and even firewood that for an hour or so would give the light of the sun back to those who gathered around. The end. And maybe you can tell where we've been living for the last 5 or 6 years. May you go to him. Talk to God. May you pursue him and never grow tired of the pursuit. It is, in fact, the adventure that we heroes have been called to. I love you. See you next time.